I said, boom. See? I'm afraid gonna match up with you. I'm just trying to show you your corner of the earth, man. Hmm? The melanated size of the earth. And you letting these people run this game when all this shit is basic common sense for real. Once you know you've been lied to, once a person lie to you, you can see straight through them. Because once you decipher once you see that they done lied to you, you already understand how they go back reading their. Oh, so if you lied about this, that means you lied about that. If you lied about that, that means you lied about that. And so then you can pick apart all the lies they done told you, and you can see through them. That's the only thing I'm showing. It's like when a cousin, a wife, a girlfriend, boyfriend, a friend, a niece, a nephew, anytime somebody lied to you, then you can read them. Then you go back in your mind like, damn, if he lied about that, oh, that's why he said that. Oh, he lied about that too. Oh, then you can pick them apart. Man, that's all I be doing, picking them apart, man. And all I'm trying to show you is the western corner of the earth. That you reside in the west, in your west corner. It ain't got to come to an end. The first thing people say, if it's flat, what the end of it? Ain't nobody said nothing about no end, but it's your corner. We coming from the center. It's unified in the center. It's united in the center. So when you run those lines up and down and across and lay that flat. From the center, when you make that cross, you make 4 sections. That's the directional cross. The intersecting lines are the directional cross. Then you make a little circle around that, 360 degrees, and then you'll understand that will be the center of the earth at that intersection, right? At that intersection, you got 4 sides. You got 4 sides. In the bottom left on paper, if you look down at the paper, but if you hold it up to your face, yeah, it's going towards the sky, but you understand that it's a flat surface and it's a top view. So the bottom left-hand corner, that's the west. And that's where we reside. And so why they keep hollering about the Western world? Where is the Western world? We finna run it. And see, when I was playing this goddamn video earlier, it just kept getting me fucked up because this man keep talking about how they want to brainwash the Western civilization. They already doing what they want to do in the South. Where the South at? In Africa. That's the other bottom corner. The South and the West. And they tear Africa up as they're manipulating and working. And them Northern Africans, they're Southerners, but the northern half of the South is being usurped and integrating with motherfucking people they shouldn't be. And that's how that shit becomes the Middle East. The Middle East usurpation of Africa. The Middle East usurpation of Africa. You dig what I'm saying? And that's how that become the Middle East. So what is that Far East out there? That's where all the technology and shit ended up out there. These the people. And guess what that Middle East represents too? Guess what's over there on that side? That land called Israel, Asia, Palestine. There's an Asian continent over there. Asia, Africa is not the same continent. When you go across Mount Sinai, that's where that land, and then you go farther out east, and that's where those synagogues at. And that's what they don't want you to know. Because that's Far East, aka 3GD shit. That's the North Pole. That was created by the Axis powers. The Emperor of Japan, the Imperial Mongolian running the world. But y'all don't want to understand. But it's all good because I'm going to show y'all. We're going to run this video back from EYENOTV, and we're going to listen to how he keep on saying how they got to brainwash the Western world civilizations. Because you're going to be able to help the African if you know too much. So now they got to enslave you mentally and make you think that you came from over there where they doing the enslaving at. Now they gonna corrupt your mind and intertwine you into all kind of Illuminati ass, gatekeeper ass roles and shit. Now we gonna run this shit back, man.
Hyundai Palisade versus Toyota Highlander. Look what Palisade has, and what Highlander. Renee Wormser wrote that the recent investment.
We're gonna run this shit back because this your education. And you need to understand your education is indoctrination. But listen to what part of the earth that they're referring to. That map right there, the United States. You see that map right there on that wall? That's in the West. And then they add Alaska. Alaska was sold to them by who? The sold it by Russians. But where is really located? That's in Hawaii, where they really located. You see how they got that right there? That is the northern part of the West. North America is the northern part of the West. And right above your head that's the line. That's the line that the Charity hold down right there to prevent them Canadians from coming across here. Not down. You see how flat this map is, but it's hanging in your face. But it's actually flat. You gotta lay it down and count it. They on the other side of the falls. The water falls, not ball. The water falls, not ball. You see this the corner. Right here. This the corner right here. See that right there? That's the corner. That's the corner. That's what my cornerback is. That's what Charity stayed. You see that right there. And on the other side, way over in the south, on the other side will be Canaan. And that's another corner. And that's what we protect. This outside of the earth. And that other side needs to be laid down so you can understand what it is. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to tell you. See, that's what I'm trying to tell you. This is the West. You're West Indians. You're in the West Indies. So why the West is so important? We have a picture on this goddamn wall up there. Oh my God, look what they got out there. Mr. Master Mason, George Washington. I remember these classrooms. Where the globe at? Ain't no globe in this motherfucker? Oh, there it is. Ain't that it? Oh, no, I don't see no globe. Okay, I don't see no globe. Okay. But let's understand. What it is on the wall? There's a globe over there. Okay. I'm looking for the globe. But look. We're gonna run this video and we're gonna see the real true enslavement. They had a few shackles and shit like that, but the enslavement is on your mind within your education, man. And listen, and when we get deep off into it, watch how he starts saying Western civilization. What Western civilizations are he talking about? Your corner of the earth. The West is your corner of the earth. The West Indies. That's what. So let's run it.
Before 1852, American education consisted of one-room schoolhouses, independent teachers, and students of all ages attending of their own free will. Curriculums and funding came directly from local communities without a federalized bureaucracy ruling over every facet like today. From 1852 to 1918, things changed as the government began pushing to enforce compulsory schooling laws all across America. These were coupled with new child labor laws in an effort to take children off the farms from under their families' tutelage and force them into
off the farms. To take the children off the farms under their parents' tutelage. Now you can't give your child knowledge anymore. They go to school your children and make it a law for them to school your children and indoctrinate your children. Indoctrination.
Indoctrination camps under the government's tutelage. These laws were met with strenuous opposition at every turn by the U.S. population, and unless there was an incredibly well-backed agenda to make sure such laws passed, they would not have. If it was simply a matter of what the people in individual states really wanted, child labor and compulsory schooling issues would have been dropped as soon as they were raised.
Child labor. You remember the United States of America closed down several of their steel industries and businesses and shit, but they so much concerned about the well-being of the United States of America, but they sent all their businesses and set up shop in China with the Mongolians and had what we call sweatshops, where they worked children to goddamn death in those sweatshops. That's why a lot of things that was United States bound made, but it was also said made in China. But it was our products because they had, but it was our products. But you looked up under that tree, it said made in China. The lamps was made in China. And the U.S. owned sweatshops over there where they worked them little Mongolian kids and shit. Yeah.
Edward A. Ross wrote in 1901, "Plans are underway to replace community, family, and church with propaganda, education, and mass media. The state shakes loose from church, reaches out to school. People are only little plastic lumps of human dough." And Elwood Cubberley said in 1909, "Each year, the child is coming to belong more to the state and less to the parent." At first, the laws were optional. Later, the law was made statewide, but the compulsory period was short, 10 to 12 weeks, and the age limits low, 9 to 12 years. After this, struggle came to extend the time, often little by little, to extend the age limits downward to 8 and 7 and upwards to 14, 15, or 16, to make the law apply to children attending private and parochial schools, and to require cooperation from such schools for having the proper handling of cases, to institute state supervision of local enforcement, to connect school attendance enforcement with the child labor legislation of the state through a system of working permits. Once federalized, mandatory schooling was employed countrywide. The compulsory attendance of 9 to 12-year-old kids, 10 to 12 weeks a year, was incrementally lengthened to the point that nowadays 4-year-olds are entering preschools and 26-year-old doctors are still being indoctrinated almost the whole year long. Ironically, the longer students remain in their respective institutions, the more respect they are generally given in their field. Thus, our experts in medicine, science, technology, philosophy, economics, politics, etc. are generally those who have received the most government indoctrination. Elwood Cubberley wrote, "Since 1900, and due more to the activity of persons concerned with social legislation and those interested in improving the moral welfare of children than to educators themselves, there has been a general revision of the compulsory education laws of our states, and the enactment of much new child welfare and anti-child labor legislation. These laws have brought into the schools not only the truant and the incorrigible, who under former conditions either left early or were expelled, but also many children who have no aptitude for book learning, and many children of inferior mental qualities who do not profit by ordinary classroom procedures. Our schools have come to contain many children who become a nuisance in the school and tend to demoralize school procedure." At the turn of the 20th century, Cubberley spoke of how children mechanically minded, without aptitude for book learning or of inferior mental capacities, became a nuisance in the school and tended to demoralize school procedure. At the turn of the 21st century, George Bush continued pushing the idea of no child left behind, the complete opposite, which expands special ed at the expense of gifted and talented programs, promotes outcome-based education, an atrocious educational philosophy now being promoted, and furthers state control of your children. If you believe in the myth of a benevolent nanny state that looks out for your best interests from cradle to grave, No Child Left Behind might fit well into your philosophy. But for independent individuals, lovers of freedom, this is the final step in government mind control. Helen Todd wrote, "In 1909, a factory inspector did an informal survey of 500 working children in 20 factories. She found that 412 of them would rather work in the terrible conditions of the factories than return to school." David Tyack wrote, "In one experiment in Milwaukee, for example, 8,000 youth were asked if they would return full-time to school if they were paid about the same wages as they earned at work. Only 16 said they would." California Education Administrator Elwood Cubberly was the main anti-establishment voice speaking out against the standardizing and enforcement of our schooling. The leading pro-establishment voice was U.S. Commissioner of Education William Torrey Harris. Listen to Harris's words from his 1906 The Philosophy of Education. 99 students out of 100 are automata, careful to walk in prescribed paths, careful to follow the prescribed custom. This is not an accident, but the result of substantial education, which, scientifically defined, is the subsumption of the individual. Is this a sane philosophy of education by anyone's standards? This is the man who gave America scientifically age-graded classrooms to replace the long-successful practice of mixed-age schoolhouses. In The Philosophy of Education, Harris wrote his vision of the perfect classroom. Quote, "The great purpose of school can be realized better in dark, airless, ugly places. It is to master the physical self, to transcend the beauty of nature. School should develop the power to withdraw from the external world." The first federalized education board was the 1870 founded NEA, National Education Administration, which quickly announced that countrywide, school science courses must be restructured to teach evolution as fact, not theory. Having gained a fair amount of pull in the NEA, in 1903, John D. Rockefeller created the GEB, General Education Board, in an effort toward, quote, "this goal of social control." Later, in 1923, he would also create the International Education Board, providing over $20 million to promote education abroad. The Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford groups have often funded and thus steered American education more so than even the government. John Taylor Gatto wrote, "Reading through the papers of the Rockefeller Foundation's General Education Board, an endowment rivaled in school policy influence in the first half of the 20th century only by Andrew Carnegie's various philanthropies, 7 curious elements force themselves on the careful reader. 1. There appears a clear intention to mold people through schooling. 2. There is a clear intention to eliminate tradition and scholarship. 3. The net effect of various projects is to create a strong class system verging on caste. 4. There is a clear intention to reduce mass critical intelligence while supporting infinite specialization. 5. There is a clear intention to weaken parental influence. 6. There is clear intention to overthrow accepted custom. 7. There is striking congruency between the cumulative purposes of GEB projects and the utopian precepts of the oddball religious sect once known as perfectionism, a secular religion aimed at making the perfection of human nature, not salvation or happiness, the purpose of existence. The agenda of philanthropy, which had so much to do with the schools we got, turns out to contain an intensely political component." Gary Allen wrote, "One would assume that since the Rockefellers are thought of as capitalists, that they would have used their fortune to foster the philosophy of individual liberty. But just the opposite is true. We have been unable to find a single project in the history of Rockefeller foundations which promotes free enterprise. Almost all of the Rockefeller grants have been used directly or indirectly to promote economic and social collectivism, i.e., socialism, fascism." Mayor Coutts wrote, "Philanthropy is the essential element in the making of Rockefeller power. It gives the Rockefellers a priceless reputation as public benefactors, which the public values so highly that power over public affairs is placed in the Rockefellers' hands. Philanthropy generates more power than wealth alone can provide. Rockefeller charity and philanthropy influences many sectors of society, from education to politics to religion. Here's an abridged list of Rockefeller-funded organizations: American Assembly, American Association for the United Nations, American Friends Service Committee, Atlantic Union, Center for Advanced Study in Behavioral Science, Center of Diplomacy and Foreign Policy, Citizens Committee for International Development, Committees on Foreign Relations, Committee for Economic Development, Council on Foreign Relations, Federation of World Governments, Foreign Policy Association, Institute of International Education, Institute for World Order, National Planning Association, U.S. National Commission, the Trilateral Commission, World Affairs Council, and United World Federalists. Notice any trends? Any doubt regarding the Rockefellers' intent in starting the GEB should be clarified in John Dee's own mission statement. Quote, "In our dreams, people yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. The present education conventions of intellectual and character education fade from their minds, and unhampered by tradition, we work our own goodwill upon a grateful and responsive folk. We shall not try to make these people or any of their children into philosophers or men of science. We have not to raise up from them authors, educators, poets, or men of letters. We shall not search for great artists, painters, musicians, nor lawyers, doctors, preachers, politicians, statesmen, of whom we have an ample supply. The task is simple. We will organize children and teach them in a perfect way the things their fathers and mothers are doing in an imperfect way." This is not a man looking out for the best interest of students. You can get a good sense of his demeanor from statements like "yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands," and talking about creating a perfect system of state education better than imperfect parental education. Martin Luther King Jr., for one, disagrees with John D. Rockefeller, saying, "The group consisting of father, mother, and child is the main educational agency of mankind." Who do you agree with? Prior to World War I, in a speech to American businessmen, President Woodrow Wilson admitted similar goals as the Rockefellers. Quote, "We want one class to have a liberal education. We want another class, a very much larger class of necessity, to forego the privilege of a liberal education and fit themselves to perform specific, difficult manual tasks." In 1931, Paul Mantoux, in his foreword to International Understanding, wrote, "And the builder of this new world must be education. Plainly, the first step in the case of each country is to train an elite to think, feel, and act internationally." In 1932, continuing their effort to change the philosophical goals of American education, the Rockefeller and Carnegie-dominated NEA created the EPC, Educational Policies Commission. Years later, the EPC put together its book, Education for All American Youth, which outlined federal programs for health, education, and welfare to be combined under one giant bureaucracy. It outlined preschool programs, sex education classes, and the removal of local control over educational issues, quote, "without seeming to do so." A 1934 NEA report advised, "A dying laissez-faire must be completely destroyed, and all of us, including the owners, must be subjected to a large degree of social control." So these education experts actually speak of themselves as owners and worry about falling under a large degree of the social control which they themselves implement. Walter Lippmann wrote, "The thesis I venture to submit to you is as follows: that during the past 40 or 50 years, those who are responsible for education have progressively removed from the curriculum of studies the Western culture which produced the modern democratic state. That the schools and colleges have, therefore, been sending out into the world men who no longer understand the creative principle of the society in which they must live. That, deprived of their cultural tradition, the newly educated Western men no longer possess in the form of substance of their own minds and spirits and ideas the premises, the rationale, the logic, the method, the values of the deposited wisdom which are the genius of the development of Western civilization. That the prevailing education is destined, if it continues, to destroy Western civilization, and is in fact destroying it. I realize quite well that this thesis constitutes a sweeping indictment of modern education, but I believe the indictment is justified, and here is a prima facie case for entering this indictment. In 1942, the Institute of Pacific Relations published Post-War Worlds. In it, P.E. Corbett wrote, "World government is the ultimate aim. It must be recognized that the law of nations takes precedence over national law. The process will have to be assisted by the deletion of nationalistic material employed in educational textbooks and its replacement by material explaining the benefits of wiser association." In 1946, former editor of the NEA Journal, Joy Elmer, published The Teacher and World Government, saying things like, "In the struggle to establish an adequate world government, the teacher can do much to prepare the hearts and minds of children for global understanding and cooperation. At the very heart of all the agencies which will assure the coming of world government must stand the school, the teacher, and the organized profession." The next year, in 1947, the American Education Fellowship, organized by establishment minion John Dewey of the Dewey Decimal System, called for the establishment of a genuine world order, an order in which national sovereignty is subordinate to world authority. In October 1947, NEA Associate Secretary William Carr wrote in the NEA Journal that teachers should teach about the various proposals that have been made for the strengthening of the United Nations and the establishment of a world citizenship and world government. Max Otto wrote, "It was natural businessmen should devote themselves to something besides business, that they should seek to influence the enactment of administration of laws, national and international, and that they should try to control education." Elitist Committee of 300 philosopher Bertrand Russell, in his 1951 book The Impact of Science on Society, wrote, "Education should aim at destroying free will, so that after pupils are thus schooled, they will be incapable throughout the rest of their lives of thinking or acting otherwise than as their schoolmasters would have wished. Influences of the home are obstructive, and in order to condition students, verses set to music and repeatedly intoned are very effective. It is for a future scientist to make these maxims precise and discover exactly how much it costs per head to make children believe that snow is black. When the technique has been perfected, every government that has been in charge of education for more than one generation will be able to control its subjects securely without the need of armies or policemen." In 1953, Carol Reese, Tennessee congressman and chairman of the RNC, Republican National Committee, along with the research director Norman Dodd and lawyer Rose Wormser, performed the first and only in-depth investigation into the activities of the Rockefeller, Carnegie, and Ford Foundations and their effect on American education. Renee Wormser wrote that the Reese investigation, quote, "leads one to the conclusion that there was indeed something in the nature of an actual conspiracy among certain leading educators in the United States to bring about socialism through the use of our school systems. They discovered that the Rockefeller Foundation was the primary culprit behind the NEA's rapidly changing policies and the teaching of socialism in America's schools and universities." Wormser continued, "A very powerful complex of foundations and allied organizations have developed over the years to exercise a high degree of control over education. Part of this complex, and ultimately responsible for it, are the Rockefeller and Carnegie groups." During a personal meeting, President Rowan Gaither of the Ford Foundation told Reese Committee Research Director Norman Dodd that, quote, "all of us here at the policy-making level of the Foundation have at one time or another served in the OSS, precursor to the CIA, or the European Economic Administration, operating under directives from the White House. We operate under those same directives. The substance under which we operate is that we shall use our grant-making power to so alter life in the United States that we can be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union." As their meeting turned from civil to threatening, Gaither warned Dodd, "If you proceed with the investigation as you have outlined, you will be killed." Fritz Springmeier wrote, "This was the situation in the 1950s, when the Reese Committee briefly investigated the Rockefeller-Carnegie groups that have continued basically unopposed for the next 40 years in controlling education. One of the educational book producers is Grolier Inc., Avery Rockefeller Jr. sits on Grolier Inc. board meetings. Another interesting board member is Theodore Waller, who is the director of Grolier Inc. He was a member of the International Book Committee of UNESCO. In the mid-60s, the Education Department produced a document called Designing Education, which advised each state to, quote, lose its independent identity as well as its authority in order to form a partnership with the federal government. Another important document at the time was Benjamin Bloom's Taxonomy of Educational Objectives, which was used as a tool to classify the ways individuals are to act, think, or feel as the result of some unit of instruction. Using B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning and other new behavioral psychology models, American education shifted focus towards emotional and outcome-based learning, so-called values clarification and sensitivity training. As noted by PhD Superintendent of South St. Paul, Minnesota schools, Ray Powell, in 1975 said, "It's all brainwashing." In 1981, the NEA published the Special Committee on Instructional Technology report, which, as usual, addressed the public and children as lumps of clay to be molded to suit their will. Quote, in its coming involvement with the technology of instruction, the profession will be faced again with the challenge of leadership, by example and by effective communication, the challenge of convincing the public that education is much more than treating students, like so many Pavlovian dogs, to be conditioned and programmed into docile acceptance of a do-it-yourself blueprint of the good life. Through outcome-based learning and other sophisticated standardized mind control methods which continue being refined to present day, our government schools are perpetually preparing a new workforce for job specialization. Charlotte Iserby wrote, "Outcome-based education, because it concentrates on the end product of its process, can be said to restrict the student's mental functioning. Success in an outcome-based environment is restricted to performing prescribed tasks to the point of automaticity. The functions of memory and creativity are not used, nor are they considered necessary to succeed in an OBE program or any program that uses Skinnerian mastery learning or direct instruction. Predictability is the bottom line for OBE, limiting the student to only those responses which they are prescribed. When trained by OBE methodology, the student cannot fail unless he employs creativity and produces an unpredicted response. In an OBE environment, he can only believe that which is acceptable. The most predictable outcome, over time, is frustration, and ultimately, low achievement and behavior problems." John Taylor Gatto wrote, "Schools at present are the occupation of children. Children have become employees, pensioners of the government at an early age. But government jobs are frequently not really jobs at all. That certainly is the case in the matter of being a schoolchild. There is nothing or very little to do in school, but one thing is demanded, that children must attend, condemned to hours of desperation, pretending to do a job that doesn't exist. At the end of the day, tired, fed up, full of aggression, their families feel the accumulated tedium of their pinched lives. Government jobs for children have broken the spirit of our people." During the Reagan administration, U.S. Department of Education Senior Policy Advisor was Camden, Maine School Board Director Charlotte Iserby. Iserby has long been an appreciated voice of opposition to outcome-based education and Skinnerian methodology. She compiled a mammoth informative expose on the devolution of American education called The Deliberate Dumbing Down of America. She explains how, quote, an alien collectivist socialist philosophy, much of which came from Europe, crashed onto the shores of our nation, bringing with it radical changes in economics, politics, and education, funded, surprisingly enough, by several wealthy American families and their tax-exempt foundations. The goal of these wealthy families and their foundations, a seamless, non-competitive worldwide system for commerce and trade, when stripped of flowery expressions of concern for minorities, the less fortunate, etc., represented the initial stage of what this author now refers to as the deliberate dumbing down of America. 70 years later, the carefully laid plans to change America from a sovereign constitutional republic with a free enterprise economic base to just one of many nations in an international, socialist, collectivist system, New World Order, are apparent. Only a dumbed-down population with no memory of America's roots as a prideful nation could be expected to willingly succumb to the worldwide workforce training planned by the Carnegie Corporation and the John D. Rockefellers, 1 and 2. John Taylor Gatto, author of The Underground History of American Education, was New York Teacher of the Year for the third time in 1991 when he quit his 30-year teaching career, saying that he was, quote, no longer willing to hurt children. He wrote, I feel ashamed that so many of us cannot imagine a better way to do things than locking children up all day in cells instead of letting them grow up knowing their families, mingling with the world, assuming real obligations, striving to be independent and self-reliant and free. I don't mean to be inflammatory, but it's as if government schooling made people dumber, not brighter, made families weaker, not stronger. The training field for these grotesque human qualities is the classroom. Schools train individuals to respond as a mass. Boys and girls are drilled in being bored, frightened, envious, emotionally needy, and generally incomplete. A successful mass production economy requires such a clientele. A small business, small farm economy like that of the Amish requires individual competence, thoughtfulness, compassion, and universal participation. Our own requires a managed mass of leveled, spiritless, anxious, familyless, friendless, godless, and obedient people who believe the difference between Cheers and Seinfeld is a subject worth arguing about. An executive director of the National Education Association announced that his organization expected to accomplish by education what dictators in Europe are seeking to do by compulsion and force. You can't get much clearer than that. World War II drove the project underground, but hardly retarded its momentum. Following cessation of worldwide hostilities, school became a major domestic battleground for the scientific rationalization of social affairs through compulsory indoctrination. It is very important for both governments and corporations that schools constantly churn out unquestioning, uninformed sheeple, crushed of creativity and individuality, who are emotionally needy, respond in groupthink patterns, and find their only reprieve in materialism and advertising. As Gerald Bracey, leading promoter of government schooling, wrote in his 1991 annual report to business clients, we must continue to produce an uneducated social class. Lifetime Learning Systems, a new corporation helping advertisers infiltrate our schools, said to its clients, school is the ideal time to influence attitudes, build long-term loyalties, introduce new products, test market, promote sampling and trial usage, and above all, to generate immediate sales. Suzanne Cornforth of Paschal and Associates Public Relations Consultants was quoted in the New York Times on July 15, 1998, saying, today's corporate sponsors want to see their money used in ways to line up with business objectives. This is a young generation of corporate sponsors, and they have discovered the advantages of building long-term relationships with educational institutions. John Taylor Gatto wrote, the secret of American schooling is that it doesn't teach the way children learn, and it isn't supposed to. School was engineered to serve a concealed command economy and a deliberate, re-stratified social order. It wasn't made for the benefit of kids and families, as those individuals and institutions would define their own needs. School is the first impression children get of organized society. Like most first impressions, it is the lasting one. Life according to school is dull and stupid. Only consumption promises relief. Coke, Big Macs, fashion jeans, that's where real meaning is found. That is the classroom's lesson, however indirectly delivered. Advertising, public relations, and stronger forms of quasi-religious propaganda are so pervasive in our schools, even in alternative schools, that independent judgment is suffocated in mass-produced secondary experiences and market-tested initiatives. Scientifically subjecting young children to factory-style seating, standardized testing, and government textbooks brings order out of chaos and makes for manageable populations. Modern schools create uniformity while suppressing skepticism and creativity. They overdevelop competitive spirit while undermining compassion and curiosity. They promote cliques, gangs, small group mentalities, and small picture thinkers. Grading and testing procedures hinder big-picture understanding of any subject and force students to focus on more simple, gradable aspects. True education and mastery of the subjects at hand are not encouraged or even feasible. Students are merely required to memorize trivial information like names, dates, places, events, etc., just long enough to regurgitate them for standardized multiple-choice tests. Then, after examination, the trivial info stored in their short-term memory disappears, along with their superficial understandings of each subject. Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, "We are students of words. We are shut up in schools and colleges and recitation rooms for 10 or 15 years and come out at last with a bag of wind, a memory of words, and do not know a thing." H.L. Mencken wrote, "That erroneous assumption is to the effect that the aim of public education is to fill the young of the species with knowledge and awaken their intelligence, and so make them fit to discharge the duties of citizenship in an enlightened and independent manner. Nothing could be further from the truth. The aim of public education is not to spread enlightenment at all. It is simply to reduce as many individuals as possible to the same safe level, to breed and train a standardized citizenry, to put down dissent and originality. That is its aim in the United States, whatever the pretensions of politicians, pedagogues, and other such mountebanks, and that is its aim everywhere else." John Stuart Mill wrote, "A general state education is a mere contrivance for molding people to be exactly like one another, and as the mold in which it casts them is that which pleases the predominant power in the government, it establishes a despotism over the mind." David Icke wrote, "The Brotherhood has also structured the education system and the media to lock people in what I call the left brain prison. The left brain is the area which deals with the physical worldview, rational thought, and all that can be seen, touched, heard, and smelled. The right brain is our intuition and our connection with higher dimensions. This is where you find the artist and creativity, inspired by our uniqueness of thought and expression. The education system and its offshoots, like the media and science, are designed to speak to the left brain and to switch off right brain thinking. This is why spending on the arts and schools is being cut back all over the world and rigid left brain programs imposed. Education fills the left brain with information, much of which is untrue and inaccurate, and it demands that this is stored and then regurgitated on the exam paper. If you do this like a robot, you pass. If, however, you filter the information through the right brain and say, hey, this is all a bunch of shit, you won't pass, even though you will be telling the truth. Isn't education just wonderful? It has been demonstrated, if you read the brainwaves of a typical American, left brain neurons are constantly more active than the right. And with the constant suppression of creativity and right brain sympathies, we crank out a population of students who want to be musicians, actors, artists, painters, and poets, but are forced into the real-world jobs of accounting, business, economics, advertising, etc. Bertrand Russell wrote, "What's the difference between a bright, inquisitive 5-year-old and a dull, stupid 19-year-old? 14 years of the British educational system." Vladimir Lenin said, "Give me 4 years to teach the children, and the seed I have sown will never be uprooted." Joseph Stalin said, "Education is a weapon whose effect depends on who holds it in his hands and at whom it is aimed." Winston Churchill said, "Schools have not necessarily much to do with education. They are mainly institutions of control, where basic habits must be inculcated in the young. Education is quite different and has little place in school." Isabel Patterson wrote, "A tax-supported compulsory educational system is the complete model of the totalitarian state." Every day, all over the world, millions of bright young minds are spending the best years of their lives being herded around by governments like cattle, responding to bells, whistles, and other Pavlovian and Skinnerian conditioning. Millions of children are locked into this program Monday to Friday from 9 to 5, performing boring, arduous tasks against their will because society has deemed it necessary. Just like the workplace, only unquestioning compliance is rewarded, and your only reprieves are snack breaks and lunchtime, which are withheld from you like salivating dogs until the bell rings. Meanwhile, you anxiously sit in rigid rows, all facing the big boss at the blackboard, focused on fantasy objectives, conditioned to view other students as competitors and hindrances. John Taylor Gatto wrote, "By bells and other concentration-destroying technology, schools teach that nothing is worth finishing because some arbitrary power intervenes both periodically and aperiodically. Love of learning can't survive this steady drill. Students are taught to work for little favors and ceremonial grades, which correlate poorly with their actual ability. By addicting children to outside approval and nonsense rewards, schools make them indifferent to the real power and potential that inheres in self-discovery reveals. Schools alienate the winner as well as the losers. By stars, checks, smiles, frowns, prizes, honors, and disgraces, schools condition children to lifelong emotional dependency. It's like training a dog. The reward-punishment cycle, known to animal trainers from antiquity, is the heart of a human psychology distilled in the late 19th century, Leipzig, and incorporated thoroughly into the scientific management revolution of the early 20th century in America. Half a century later, by 1968, it had infected every school system in the United States. Each day, schools reinforce how absolute and arbitrary power really is by granting and denying access to fundamental needs for toilet, water, privacy, and movement. In this way, basic human rights, which usually require only individual volition, are transformed into privileges not to be taken for granted. School teaches how hopeless it is to resist because you are always watched. There is no place to hide, nor should you want to. Your avoidance behavior is actually a signal you should be watched even more closely than the others. Privacy is a thought crime. School sees to it that there is no private time, no private space, no minute uncommanded, no desk free from search, no bruise not inspected by medical policing or the counseling arm of thought patrols. Marvin Minsky wrote, "It seems to me that much of what we call education is really socialization. Consider what we do to our kids. Is it really a good idea to send your 6-year-old into a room full of 6-year-olds, and then the next year to put your 7-year-old in with 7-year-olds and so on? A simple recursive argument suggests this exposes them to a real danger of all growing up with the minds of 6-year-olds. And so far as I can see, that's exactly what happens. Our present culture may be largely shaped by this strange idea of isolating children's thought from adult thought. Perhaps the way our culture educates its children better explains why most of us come out as dumb as they do than it explains how some of us come out as smart as they do." William Damon wrote, "There has never in the history of the civilized world been a cohort of kids that is so little affected by adult guidance and so attuned to a peer world. We have removed grown-up wisdom and allowed them to drift into a self-constructed, highly relativistic world of friendship and peers." John Taylor Gatto wrote, "Don't let a world of funny animals, dancing alphabet letters, pastel colors, and preachy music suffocate your little boy or girl's consciousness at exactly the moment when big questions about the world beckon. Funny animals were invented by social engineers. They knew something important about fantasy and social engineering that you should teach yourself. Does all this age-graded, childish edutainment serve to make education more fun or more trivial and superficial? As cute as they may be, are Disney, Barney, Sesame Street, and others what are best for our children? Are textbooks with bright color pictures helpful or distracting?" Thomas Hodgkin said, "Men had better be without education than be educated by their rulers." Leo Tolstoy wrote, Take at hazard 100 children of several educated generations and 100 uneducated children of the people, and compare them in anything you please, in strength, in agility, in mind, in the ability to acquire knowledge, even in morality, and in all respects, you are startled by the vast superiority on the side of the children of the uneducated. George Bernard Shaw wrote, "My schooling not only failed to teach me what it professed to be teaching, but prevented me from being educated to an extent which infuriates me when I think of all I might have learned at home by myself." John Taylor Gatto wrote, "Samuel Johnson entered a note into his diary several hundred years ago about the powerful effect reading Hamlet was having upon him. He was 9 at the time." Abraham Cowley wrote of his infinite delight with Spenser's Faerie Queene, an epic poem that treats moral values allegorically in 9-line stanzas that never existed before Spenser and hardly since. He spoke of his pleasure with its stories of knights and giants and monsters and brave houses. Cowley was 12 at the time. It couldn't have been an easy read in 1630 for anyone, and it's beyond the reach of many elite college graduates today. What happened? The answer is that Dick and Jane happened. Frank had a dog. His name was Spot. That happened. There are many ways to burn books without a match. You can order the reading of childish books to be substituted for serious ones, as we have done. You can simplify the language you allow in school books to the point that students become disgusted with reading because it demeans them, being thinner gruel than their spoken speech. We have done that too. One subtle and very effective strategy is to fill books with pictures and lively graphics, so they trivialize words in the same fashion the worst tabloid newspapers do, forcing pictures and graphs into every space where readers should be building pictures of their own, preempting space into which personal intellect should be expanding. In this, we are the world's master. George Washington attended only 2 years of formal schooling in his life. Abraham Lincoln had only 50 weeks of schooling, and even that was seen as a waste of time by his relatives. In 1840, the rate of complex literacy in the U.S. was incredibly high, between 93 and 100%. The Connecticut census showed only 1 of every 579 people was illiterate. Over a century and a half later, in 1993, the National Adult Literacy Survey reported that 1 in every 5 Americans was illiterate. The 1993 survey represented 190 million U.S. adults over age 16 with an average school attendance of 12.4 years. 42 million were completely illiterate. 50 million read at a 4th to 5th grade level. 55 to 60 million read at a 6th to 8th grade level. 30 million at a 9th to 10th grade level, and less than 10 million at a university level. Sir Walter Scott said, "All men who have turned out worth anything have had the chief hand in their own education." John Taylor Gatto wrote, "In 1882, 5th graders read these authors in their Appleton School Reader: William Shakespeare, Henry Thoreau, George Washington, Sir Walter Scott, Mark Twain, Benjamin Franklin, Oliver Wendell Holmes, John Bunyan, Daniel Webster, Samuel Johnson, Lewis Carroll, Thomas Jefferson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and others like them." In 1995, a student teacher of 5th graders in Minneapolis wrote to the local newspaper, "I was told children are not to be expected to spell the following words correctly: back, big, call, came, can, day, did, dog, down, get, good, have, he, home, if, in, is, it, like, little man, morning, mother, my, night, off, out, over, people, play, ran, said, saw, she, some, soon, there, them, up, us, very, water, we, went, where, when, will, would, etc. Is this nuts? Dr. Seuss, the children's author, wrote many bestsellers, admittedly using a controlled scientific vocabulary supplied by his publisher. He said in a 1981 interview that, "I did it for a textbook house, and they sent me a word list. That was due to the Dewey Revolt in the 20s, in which they threw out phonics reading and went to a word recognition, as if you're reading a Chinese pictograph instead of blending sounds of different letters. I think killing phonics was one of the greatest causes of illiteracy in the country. Anyway, they had it all worked out that a healthy child at the age of 4 can only learn so many words in a week. So there were 223 words to use in this book. I read the list 3 times, and I almost went out of my head. I said, I'll read it once more, and if I can find 2 words that rhyme, that will be the title of my book. I found cat and hat, and said the title of my book will be The Cat in the Hat. Richard Mitchell wrote, "Far from failing in its intended task, our educational system is in fact succeeding magnificently, because its aim is to keep the American people thoughtless enough to go on supporting the system."
Let's get fiscal. Lesson 3, savings gains. Setting up your financial future? Credit Karma gives you the tools to unlock a whole new level of financial fitness so you can build your credit scores. Better scores can lead to lower rates on everything from credit cards and loans to insurance premiums. And lower rates mean extra cash in your pocket. Harness the power of Credit Karma today to win your financial future tomorrow. Travel can be a nightmare. Luckily, you rented your car on Turo. Skip the rental counter with Turo. Rent just about any car, just about anywhere.
Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote.
That was Donald Trump telling an audience that they wouldn't have to vote anymore while pandering to an audience of Christians. Between Republicans passing laws mandating that the 10 Commandments be shown in classrooms, abortion bans, and even Mike Johnson calling the separation of church and state a misnomer, Christian nationalism is clearly on the rise by Republicans, which brings us to a very timely episode of Class with Jamie Raskin, where the congressman here will debunk right-wing constitutional fallacies and fever dreams. And today, he's going to take on this notion that America is a white Christian nation where the Bible is supreme and superior to the Constitution. So, Congressman, floor is yours.
Well, that is the heart of white Christian nationalism, and we have seen it rear its ugly head in a lot of places, including on January 6, 2021. We get lots of manifestations of it in Project 2025, and of course, Donald Trump's outbursts encode that basic message that we'll get through this democracy thing quickly enough, and then we'll get back to having the right people rule. So what we're going to look at today is the fallacy that America is a white Christian nation where the Bible is dominant and supreme to the Constitution. But I want to look at both parts of it, that America is a Christian nation and that America is a white nation. Let's start with the claim that America is a Christian nation. And there's only one sense, and one sense only, in which this is even arguably or even weakly true, which is in the purely demographic sense, where it could be said, well, you know, America has 332 million people, and more than 200 million of them are Christian. Therefore, if you've got nearly 2/3 of Americans who are Christian, America's a Christian nation. And you could, perform a similar operation with race and say, of those 332 million people, something around 70% of those people are white, maybe 63 or 64% would define themselves in the census as only white and not white and something else. But in any event, a majority of the people would call themselves white in some sense, and therefore it's a white nation. Well, if you want to use that kind of demographic circular reasoning, that tautology, and that does something for you, I suppose you can go ahead and say it. But of course, there's nothing which freezes the population either in terms of religion or race. And it's predicted that America won't be a majority white country in 25 years. And I guess even in that narrow, limited demographic sense, it wouldn't even be true. But all of that is really beside the point, because although they sometimes will hide behind that tent, we know that when they say America's a Christian country or a white country, they're making an assertion about the nature of our social contract and about the nature of our Constitution, and it's just wrong. Oftentimes it's wrapped in historical claims. Those claims are overwhelmingly wrong as well. And then when those constitutional assertions are converted into political and moral claims, well, at that point, the normative argument clearly becomes a racist one. So let's go back to the beginning and let's look at the nature of the American Revolution and then the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution to see whether there's any basis for this claim that America is a Christian country. Well, to begin with, the leaders of the American Revolution, the intellectual and political leaders, people like Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin and John Adams and James Madison and Tom Paine, these people were Enlightenment liberals who wanted to rebel against centuries of religious superstition, state-imposed religion, religion-controlled government, and theocracy. They were opposed to centuries of religious warfare between the Catholics and the Protestants, which were every bit as bloody and vicious as the wars between the Shia and the Sunni today in the Muslim world. And they wanted to oppose holy crusades, inquisition, witchcraft trials, the whole apparatus of religious persecution, which they wanted to leave in the Middle Ages and did not think belonged in a period of modern democratic enlightenment. And so they set about creating a government that radically separated church and state. And as Madison would put it in his famous remonstrance against religious taxation, that left matters of faith to each individual, to each man and woman to decide for himself or herself what their relationship to God would be without the government intervening and getting involved and compelling people to worship a particular way or pray a particular way or pay taxes or tithes to particular churches and religions and so on. So the Declaration of Independence does not mention the word God. It does talk about a creator, and the dominant themes of the Declaration of Independence are that we are endowed by our creator with life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and unalienable rights, and that the only legitimating principle for government is the consent of the governed, the people themselves, that the right to rule does not come from God or come from a church, but it comes from the consent of the governed, the people ourselves. And all men, of course we would translate it today as all men and women, but all men are created equal. So you have in the Declaration of Independence the elucidation of the basic themes of equality, liberty, and freedom, and democracy, the consent of the governed, as being the essential legitimating principles for governance. And that was the basic concept of the Declaration of Independence, which of course set forth a bill of particulars against the king, who claimed to rule with divine right and an established church. But the American Revolution wanted to topple all of that. And that becomes clear when we get to the Constitution. Of course, there were iterative drafts between the Declaration and the Constitution. There were Articles of Association. There were Articles of Confederation. Again, none of them.
truth about coffee? It's acidic, spikes your stress hormones, and it does nothing for your gut, your skin, or your brain. And I know because I...
Before 1852,
That's how he kept talking about the Western world, Western civilization.
first you pay out your tuition to get into university, where they strip you of your intuition and give you an indoctrination. Then you receive a Master's Masonic degree while wearing a Masonic mortarboard cap and Cult of Saturn black robes to become an alumni or illumini. Graduation means to increment or retard progress. As Jordan Maxwell says, the true meaning of graduation is gradual indoctrination. Indeed, stick a bunch of 5-year-olds in a room full of 5-year-olds for a year, then a bunch of 6-year-olds with 6-year-olds and so on for 20 years until you're so indoctrinated they give you a doctorate. Michael Tessarian wrote, "The syllables are ma for measure and store for star, measurer of the stars, namely an astrologer. Children are still given a star today for successful application to their studies. When we matriculate from university, we are given a master's degree. This is purely Sabian. Degrees are part of the cycle of the zodiac. One was given a degree to show that they, like the sun they were progeny of, had ascended to an exalted place. Once you had mastered the stars, you were then, quite literally, a master." Jordan Maxwell wrote, "When you graduate from high school, you come out processionally with a black robe, which is black for Saffron, the god of the Hebrews, requiring that you wear the square mortarboard on top of your head. The square mortarboards are, of course, used by the Freemasons for their plaster. So that is why you wear a square mortarboard when you graduate, ultimately becoming an alumni. It all has to do with Freemasonry. It all has to do with the control of education in this country." Judges and Roman Catholic priests also traditionally wear and wore black robes. Judges have a Masonic hammer or gavel, which they hit to declare the word of law. The idea of law comes from the biblical 10 stone commandments, and so it is said that you break the law. Judges always sit on a 3-tier high platform representing the first 3 blue degrees of Freemasonry. The same tri-tier platform is found at Congress, and the altar in most Catholic and Protestant churches is 3 tiers high. That's also why you get or give someone the 3rd degree, related to the 3rd degree of Masonry, where the initiate is asked a series of probing questions he must answer correctly in order to become a Master Mason. There is usually a gate around church altars, just as there are gates with swinging doors in every courtroom. The congregations at church all stand up to recognize the priest, just as all rise when the judge walks in. Then the judge takes a recess, because he's in court, playing a game of tennis commandments with lawyers who play the dialectic protagonist-antagonist game, bouncing the advantage into each other's court. In the courtroom, witnesses must place their hand on the Old and New Testament before giving their testimony, just as a priest's sermon is often called testimony. Also notice mon from moon in testimony and sermon. As a witness swears in, one hand is placed on the Bible, while the other is held up. In church, when parishioners feel the Holy Spirit, often during song, they will hold one or both hands up to praise the Lord. Jordan Maxwell said, "Then when you get further into Saturn, you begin to understand that his color is black, that he was a god of one of the many different Semitic tribes or groups, and one of his symbols was a square. Then you get into the square black mortarboard that the university or high school students wear when they graduate. It is a square on his head, and it's usually black, the color of Saturn, one of the ancient Hebrew gods. This is the same black used on the robe the judge wears when he's going to throw you in jail. because the black represents Saturn. Saturn is the old Semitic god. That is why churches and courtrooms look the same today, because when you go into churches, you sit out here with the poor folks in the chairs, out here in the pews. But you cannot go up into the lifted higher elevation. You can't go inside the gate. You can't go inside the little doors. Only the priest can go inside there and officiate for you. You stay on the outside with the poor folks. The altar is always raised at least 3 tiers, because in Egypt, that was the way it was always done. The altar was always raised so the people could see the representative of God dressed in black. The priest comes out on the altar dressed in black, and he is officiating for you. He is the mediator between you and God. That is the same thing that happens in the courtroom. You walk in and you are part of the poor folks sitting out here in the audience. And here is the fence or gate that separates you. The attorneys can go inside the gate, and they are your mouthpiece to go talk to God for you and see if they can get you off. And the lawyers will be the mediator between God or the judge who judges you and man. That is where all this comes from in our society today. Sheriff in the ancient Egyptian was a lawgiver, and his badge was always a 6-pointed star, which is another symbol of Saturn. U.S. sheriffs in the Wild West up to today still wear the 6-pointed star. It is interesting that Saturn's symbol is the 6-pointed star. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun. Saturn Day is the 6th day of the week. And now NASA is receiving images of the Saturn hexagram, 6-sided atmospheric formation at Saturn's poles. The 6th chakra of the human energy system is the 3rd eye, pineal gland. 6 3 times is 666. When your 3rd eye chakra opens, you develop your 6th sense of intuition and spirituality. From a consciousness perspective, the 6th sense, your intuitions and hunches, are messengers of God, your guardian angels. Isn't it interesting that angels have halos and rings around their heads, and Saturn is the only planet with a halo or ring around it? Jordan Maxwell wrote, "That is why today when you get married before God, and the symbol of that God is the ring that is put on each other's fingers, the ring of Saturn. In the marriage phases, one also begins to see what that has to do with Saturn. So when you get married with a ring, and the symbol of that God is the ring of Saturn. You're wearing God's ring. And the yarmulke was the round ring that you wear on your head, for Saturn, your God. Even in the Middle Ages, in the temples, Catholic monks would shave their heads in a round circle, and the Hebrews, instead of doing that, would wear the yarmulke. But it all had to do with the round rings of Saturn." Michael Tessarian wrote, "The ancient name of Saturn was, as mentioned, El. It is the reason why those that were chosen by El were called elites. In fact, the words elect, elder, elevated, Elohim, temple, circle, gospel, apostle, disciple, evangelists, etc., all derived from the cult of El. Angels are messengers of God, but God was El, which is why we have the names of the archangels bearing the El suffix: Raphael, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, etc. Acharya S. wrote, "The plural term Elohim appears over 2,500 times in the Old Testament, but is falsely translated in most versions. This fact of plurality explains why in Genesis, gods said, 'Let us make man in our image.' As stated, Elohim refers to both gods and goddesses, and its singular form El served as a prefix or suffix to the names of gods, people, and places, whence Emmanuel, Gabriel, Bethel, etc. Even Satan was one of the Elohim. The gods of Elohim are angels, the messengers of God. When witches cast a spell, they put the hex, 6, on someone. And when chefs deep fry something, they deep six it. It is the elites who run the world today. Elite comes from the Israelite, which come from the Egyptian worship of the moon, Isis, the sun, Ra, and Saturn, Elohim, hence Israel. Jews and Muslims alike worship a huge black cube and box called Kaaba at Mecca. Their god, Yahweh, YHWH, is known as the Tetragrammaton, meaning their four-letter, four-sided God. The Kabbalah of Jewish mysticism and Masonry comes from Kaaba, Allah, or cube God, around which people gather and ceremonially walk in circles. Thus it can be said that they are circling the square. Masons are also constantly referring to circling the square and squaring the circle. For instance, this is why a boxing match is fought for rounds in the ring, but it is actually a four-sided square arena with corners. The Freemasonic G, geometry, God, symbol within a compass, and T-square symbolizes this as well. Just as people circle around their cube god Kaaba, so the Masons use a compass and square around their G god geometry. In Islamic tradition, the rock is where Muhammad ascended to heaven, accompanied by the angel Gabriel. The Dome of the Rock was built in the 600 AD era and was won back by the Israelites on 06-07-67 after the Six-Day War. The dome's outer walls measure 60, 6 times 10 feet wide, and 36, 6 times 6 feet high. The Knights Templar claimed the Dome of the Rock was the site of the Temple of Solomon, and set up their Templum Domini adjacent to it during the 12th century. Fritz Springmeier wrote, "Saturn is an important key to understanding the long heritage this conspiracy has back to antiquity. The city of Rome was originally known as Saturnia, or City of Saturn. The Roman Catholic Church retains much of the Saturn worship in its ritual. Saturn also relates to Lucifer. In various occult dictionaries, Saturn is associated with evil. Saturn was important to the religion of Mithra and also the Druids. Black is both Saturn's color and Satan's color. The Black Holy Bible tells us Satan is 666. Saturn is the 6th planet. Its symbol is a 6-pointed star. It supposedly has hexagon weather formations, and Saturn Day, the 6th day, is Ozzy Osbourne's Black Sabbath. Something suspicious surrounds Saturn, and it's certainly not just its rings."
Where can I find $10,000 without maxing out my high-interest credit cards? When unexpected expenses come up, credit cards may seem like a quick, easy fix, but those high-interest rates can really add up. A low fixed-rate personal loan through Upstart makes borrowing easier. Apply online for $1,000 to $50,000. Typically, personal loans have a lower rate than credit cards. Most borrowers are instantly approved, and you can get your money sent the next day with no hidden fees ever. Checking your rate takes a few minutes with no impact to your credit score.
This is a way to make this whole propaganda campaign fold in on itself.
A 5-time. First, you pay out your tuition to get into university, where they strip you of your intuition and give you an indoctrination. Then you receive a Master's Masonic degree while wearing a Masonic mortarboard cap and Cult of Saturn black robes to become an alumni or illumini. Graduation means to increment or retard progress. As Jordan Maxwell says, the true meaning of graduation is gradual indoctrination. Indeed. Stick a bunch of 5-year-olds in a room full of 5-year-olds for a year, then a bunch of 6-year-olds with 6-year-olds, and so on, for 20 years, until you're so indoctrinated, they give you a doctorate. Michael Tessarian wrote, "The syllables are ma for measure, and stor for star, measurer of the stars, namely an astrologer. Children are still given a star today for successful application to their studies. When we matriculate from university, we are given a master's degree. This is purely Sabian. Degrees are part of the cycle of the zodiac. One was given a degree to show that they, like the sun they were progeny of, had ascended to an exalted place. Once you had mastered the stars, you were then, quite literally, a master." Jordan Maxwell wrote, "When you graduate from high school, you come out processionally with a black robe, which is black for Saffron, the god of the Hebrews, requiring that you wear the square mortarboard on top of your head. The square mortarboards are, of course, used by the Freemasons for their plaster. So that is why you wear a square mortarboard when you graduate, ultimately becoming an alumni. It all has to do with Freemasonry. It all has to do with the control of education in this country. Judges and Roman Catholic priests also traditionally wear and wore black robes. Judges have a Masonic hammer or gavel, which they hit to declare the word of law. The idea of law comes from the biblical 10 stone commandments, and so it is said that you break the law. Judges always sit on a 3-tier high platform, representing the first 3 blue degrees of Freemasonry. The same tri-tier platform is found at Congress, and the altar in most Catholic and Protestant churches is 3 tiers high. That's also why you get or give someone the 3rd degree, related to the 3rd degree of Masonry, where the initiate is asked a series of probing questions he must answer correctly in order to become a Master Mason. There is usually a gate around church altars, just as there are gates with swinging doors in every courtroom. The congregations at church all stand up to recognize the priest, just as all rise when the judge walks in. Then the judge takes a recess, because he's in court, playing a game of tennis commandments, with lawyers who play the dialectic protagonist-antagonist game, bouncing the advantage into each other's court. In a courtroom, witnesses must place their hand on the Old and New Testament before giving their testimony, just as a priest's sermon is often called testimony. Also notice mon from moon in testimony and sermon. As a witness swears in, one hand is placed on the Bible, while the other is held up. In church, when parishioners feel the Holy Spirit, often during song, they will hold one or both hands up to praise the Lord. Jordan Maxwell said, "Then when you get further into Saturn, you begin to understand that his color is black, that he was a god of one of the many different Semitic tribes or groups, and one of his symbols was a square. Then you get into the square black mortarboard that the university or high school students wear when they graduate. It is a square on his head, and it's usually black, the color of Saturn, one of the ancient Hebrew gods. This is the same black used on the robe the judge wears when he's going to throw you in jail, because the black represents Saturn. Saturn is the old Semitic god. That is why churches and courtrooms look the same today, because when you go into churches, you sit out here with the poor folks in the chairs, out here in the pews, but you cannot go up into the lifted higher elevation. You can't go inside the gate. You can't go inside the little doors. Only the priest can go inside there and officiate for you. You stay on the outside with the poor folks. The altar is always raised at least 3 tiers, because in Egypt, that was the way it was always done. The altar was always raised so the people could see the representative of God dressed in black. The priest comes out on the altar dressed in black, and he is officiating for you. He is the mediator between you and God. That is the same thing that happens in the courtroom. You walk in, and you are part of the poor folks, sitting out here in the audience. And here is the fence, or gate, that separates you. The attorneys can go inside the gate, and they are your mouthpiece, to go talk to God for you, and see if they can get you off. And the lawyers will be the mediator between God, or the judge who judges you, and man. That is where all this comes from in our society today. Sheriff in the ancient Egyptian was a lawgiver, and his badge was always a 6-pointed star, which is another symbol of Saturn. U.S. sheriffs in the Wild West, up to today, still wear the 6-pointed star. It is interesting that Saturn's symbol is the 6-pointed star. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun. Saturn Day is the 6th day of the week. And now NASA is receiving images of the Saturn hexagram, 6-sided atmospheric formation at Saturn's poles. The 6th chakra of the human energy system is the 3rd eye, pineal gland. 6 3 times is 666. When your 3rd eye chakra opens, you develop your 6th sense of intuition and spirituality. From a consciousness perspective, the 6th sense, your intuitions and hunches, are messengers of God, your guardian angels. Isn't it interesting that angels have halos and rings around their heads, and Saturn is the only planet with a halo or ring around it? Jordan Maxwell wrote, "That is why today, when you get married before God, and the symbol of that God is the ring that is put on each other's fingers, the ring of Saturn. In the marriage phases, one also begins to see what that has to do with Saturn. So when you get married with a ring, and the symbol of that God is the ring of Saturn. You're wearing God's ring. And the yarmulke was the round ring that you wear on your head, for Saturn, your God. Even in the Middle Ages, in the temples, Catholic monks would shave their heads in a round circle, and the Hebrews, instead of doing that, would wear the yarmulke. But it all had to do with the round rings of Saturn." Michael Tessarian wrote, "The ancient name of Saturn was, as mentioned, El. It is the reason why those that were chosen by El were called elites. In fact, the words elect, elder, elevated, Elohim, temple, circle, gospel, apostle, disciple, evangelists, etc., all derived from the cult of El. Angels are messengers of God, but God was El, which is why we have the names of the archangels bearing the El suffix, Raphael, Michael, Uriel, Gabriel, etc. Acharya S. wrote, "The plural term Elohim appears over 2,500 times in the Old Testament, but is falsely translated in most versions. This fact of plurality explains why in Genesis, gods said, "Let us make man in our image." As stated, Elohim refers to both gods and goddesses, and its singular form El served as a prefix or suffix to the names of gods, people, and places, whence Emmanuel, Gabriel, Bethel, etc. Even Satan was one of the Elohim. The gods of Elohim are angels, the messengers of God. When witches cast a spell, they put the hex, 6, on someone. And when chefs deep fry something, they deep six it. It is the elites who run the world today. Elite comes from the Israelite, which come from the Egyptian worship of the moon, Isis, the sun, Ra, and Saturn, Elohim, hence Israel. Jews and Muslims alike worship a huge black cube and box called Kaaba at Mecca. Their god, Yahweh, YHWH, is known as the Tetragrammaton, meaning their four-letter, four-sided God. The Kabbalah of Jewish mysticism and Masonry comes from Kaaba, Allah, or cube God, around which people gather and ceremonially walk in circles. Thus it can be said that they are circling the square. Masons are also constantly referring to circling the square and squaring the circle. For instance, this is why a boxing match is fought for rounds in the ring, but it is actually a four-sided square arena with corners. The Freemasonic G, geometry, God, symbol within a compass, and T-square symbolizes this as well. Just as people circle around their cube god Kaaba, so the Masons use a compass and square around their G god geometry. In Islamic tradition, the rock is where Muhammad ascended to heaven, accompanied by the angel Gabriel. The Dome of the Rock was built in the 600 AD era and was won back by the Israelites on 06-07-67 after the Six-Day War. The dome's outer walls measure 60, 6 times 10 feet wide, and 36, 6 times 6 feet high. The Knights Templar claimed the Dome of the Rock was the site of the Temple of Solomon, and set up their Templum Domini adjacent to it during the 12th century. Fritz Springmeier wrote, "Saturn is an important key to understanding the long heritage this conspiracy has back to antiquity. The city of Rome was originally known as Saturnia, or City of Saturn. The Roman Catholic Church retains much of the Saturn worship in its ritual. Saturn also relates to Lucifer. In various occult dictionaries, Saturn is associated with evil. Saturn was important to the religion of Mithra and also the Druids. Black is both Saturn's color and Satan's color. The Black Holy Bible tells us Satan is 666. Saturn is the 6th planet. Its symbol is a 6-pointed star. It supposedly has hexagon weather formations, and Saturn Day, the 6th day, is Ozzy Osbourne's Black Sabbath. Something suspicious surrounds Saturn, and it's certainly not just its rings."
Let's get fiscal. Lesson 2, credit card combat. Getting your finances together? Learn to master your money with Credit Karma today for a stronger tomorrow. Defend yourself against generic advice and one-size-fits-all recommendations. Credit Karma gathers offers from trusted partners, helping you quickly pin down the cards and loans that are right for you so you can build those money muscles. Harness the power of Credit Karma today to win your financial future tomorrow.
He was fired just 3 weeks before he was set to retire.
And now he's becoming an industry whistleblower. Kate Jennings has the story.
30 years.
This man was fired after 30 years of loyalty. Now he's exposing a $500 billion industry.
I saw this as an opportunity to help people.
Todd Andreessen dedicated his life to the same insurance company, only to be fired a week before his retirement, losing his pension.
I only had 7 days to go. It hit me completely out of the blue.
That night, Todd went for a drive to clear his head, but tragedy struck. A head-on collision totaled his car and put him in the hospital. Although Todd recovered, the situation worsened when his old company denied his claim and raised his rate.
I was angry. I was hurt. I mean nothing to them.
Determined to fight back, Todd revealed a secret he'd known for decades. 80% of a typical auto insurance bill goes toward paying commissions and fees, and roughly 20% is for the actual coverage.
Every insurance agent in the country knows this.
No longer bound by his NDA, Todd created a new solution that eliminated the middleman and passed the savings on to drivers. His grandson, a recent MIT graduate, helped him build a simple website where drivers could get a new, much lower rate within just a few clicks.
I was excited to finally use what I learned at MIT on a project that would actually help people.
The movement continues to grow, but insurance companies are trying to take it down because of how much money they are losing. We encourage everyone to visit the website and discover how much of your monthly bill is going to commissions and fees. Most people are shocked to learn they're getting back at least $2,000 in returns and savings.
I found this website, and I found out that I was overpaying in commissions and fees by $140. My new rate's only $45 a month. It's amazing.
I cut my rate by more than half, and now I'm saving enough to cover both my groceries and my rent. So I definitely recommend giving it a shot. I was just shocked at how much I was overpaying.
Todd continues fighting against unfair insurance practices, determined to empower everyday people by putting money back into their pockets.
It's easy. Just go to our website, answer a few basic questions about your car, and you'll find out how much money you're going to get back.
We've provided the link below for anyone that's interested. Visit the website today and discover how much you can get back in savings. Chris, back to you.
Renting a car for your next family road trip on the Turo app means extra fun, extra friends, and extra love. For all of life's extras, rent on the Turo app.
We've got a hugely topical episode today. I have the incredible honor, as always, of being joined by my co-host for our series Class with Jamie Raskin, where the congressman debunks right-wing constitutional fallacies and fever dreams. Today's episode could not come at a more opportune moment as the Supreme Court now considers the question of presidential immunity for Donald Trump. And while there's a lot of spin out there, no one to better counter that disinformation than Jamie Raskin. So I'll hand it over to the congressman who will take on the right-wing fallacy that as commander-in-chief, the president has both the power to do whatever he wants and absolute immunity from any legal consequences for criminal actions.
Brian, thank you so much. I'm delighted to be with everybody. Today we're taking on a fallacy that's so obvious, so glaring, and so striking. But what's interesting is that sometimes it's the most obvious fallacies that are the trickiest ones to debunk and refute. I remember Sherlock Holmes once saying that there's nothing more deceptive than an obvious fact. And that's definitely true in the age of Donald Trump, because this is a case of first impression, like so many of the other issues that are raised by Donald Trump, because no other president has acted in such extreme and explosive and incendiary ways. So it's not like there's a bunch of precedents that map out how to respond to it. And so we have to search through the Constitution to explain why his actions are completely in derogation of the constitutional fabric itself. The case that is being considered by the Supreme Court, Donald Trump's claim that he's absolutely immune, is indeed a case of first impression, just like many of the other fallacies that he has floated during this period. But what we're going to look at is this one. As commander-in-chief of the nation, the president has both the power to do whatever he wants and absolute immunity from any legal consequences for his criminal actions. Now, there are actually multiple fallacies tucked in here. I've snuck in like a law professor on a final exam. The first is as Commander-in-Chief of the nation, which the president is not. That is not his title. He's Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy during times of actual conflict from Article 2 of the Constitution, and of the militias when they're called up into actual service. So any president who walks around saying, I'm the commander-in-chief, like he's the dictator of the country, is just absolutely wrong. But the central fallacies here are that the president can do whatever he wants, something that we heard repeatedly from Donald Trump when he was in president. He says, and then there's the Article 2, which allows me to do whatever I want. Of course, the central job of the president under Article 2 is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Not that the laws are violated or the laws are departed from, but the laws are faithfully executed. And if the president could do whatever he wants, then why do we have the power to impeach and convict the president for treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors? And then, why do we have the power to prosecute him? Or do we? Because that's what this case is really about, that has gone up to the Supreme Court, United States versus Trump, that was found against the president in district court by Judge Chutkan, against the president by the D.C. Circuit panel, an excellent panel made up of Judges Pan, Henderson, and Childs, 2 Democratic nominees to the bench, 1 Republican nominee to the bench, but all unanimously rejecting Trump's claim. What does he say? He says a former president cannot be prosecuted criminally for anything that he did while he was in office, pursuant to his office. And again, no president has ever alleged that before, which is why it's so foreign and so strange to our experience. The judges in the D.C. Circuit do a great job of leading us through this, and I'll kind of follow their lead and embellish a little bit on several different points. But the first point I want to make is generally about the structure of the Constitution. Article 1 puts Congress in the first article for a reason, which is that we overthrew a king. We wanted to get away from monarchical government, and we wanted to vest power not in a monarch, lord, in a czar or an emperor, but in we the people. And the House of Representatives and the senators in the Senate are the representatives of the people. And we are the lawmaking branch. And if you look at the Constitution, as I hope you will see that Article 1 goes on for a long time, setting forth all of the powers that Congress has to regulate commerce among the states, to regulate commerce between America and other nations, to coin money, to govern naturalization, to govern the district that's to become the seat of government, and on and on. And then in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 18, and all other powers that are necessary and proper to the execution of the foregoing power. So it's very expansive. Then you get to Article 2, Section 3, and look at that last phrase there. This is really the core of it. You know, it's about naming ambassadors and so on, giving a State of the Union address. He shall take care that the laws be faithfully executed, and shall commission all the officers of the United States. That's it. And then you get right into Section 4, after stating that the president shall faithfully execute the laws, setting forth how the president can be impeached. The president, VP, and all civil officers shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. But I just want you to keep that design structurally, generally in mind as we get into this issue, because Congress is put first, and the president's job under Section 2 is to take care that the laws are faithfully executed, to implement the laws of the Congress. All right. Now, Trump attempted to bypass and overthrow the Constitution of the United States when he tried to stay in office in the weeks leading up to January 6th and then on January 6th itself. That's what this case is about. This case comes from the criminal trial of Donald Trump on 4 charges that have been brought by special counsel Jack Smith. The first is a conspiracy to defraud the United States of America by collecting all of these fraudulent electoral college slates from different states and then asserting that these are the bona fide, honest electors determined by the states in their presidential election, which they most assuredly were not. The second is the conspiracy to obstruct a federal proceeding. Here, the joint session of Congress called under the 12th Amendment to receive the Electoral College votes sent in by the governors through their certificates of ascertainment sent to the House and the Senate and to the Archivist of the United States. Third is actual interference with the federal proceeding. And then the fourth is violation of the voting rights of the people, a conspiracy to deprive persons of the United States of their right to vote. Okay, so those are the 4 criminal charges. Donald Trump asserts against all of them that he's absolutely immune from criminal prosecution for official acts he undertook as president. Now, one of the amusing things about that is asserting that the attempt to overthrow the presidential election was an official act. Of course, his official responsibility there was to leave office after 4 years and to take care that the laws were faithfully executed, including all of the laws passed under the Electoral College provisions in the Constitution. That's what he was supposed to do. But he's saying, no, he undertook these official acts to try to get the state legislatures to set aside the Electoral College votes by trying to get state election officials like Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger in Georgia just to find him 11,780 votes, and then by trying to get the Department of Justice to falsely declare it a corrupt and fraudulent election, and then finally by trying to get Vice President Pence to step outside of his official constitutional role, administering the counting of the Electoral College votes. The idea was to try to get Pence to force it into a contingent election or just to go ahead and announce that Trump was president, and then Trump was prepared to ride over on the shoulders of the mob like Mussolini and come in and simply declare himself president again, and then invoke the Insurrection Act and call in the National Guard to come and put down the insurrectionary chaos that he had unleashed against us. All right, that was basically the plan. Well, he says, you can't charge me for any of these things. I'm absolutely immune from criminal prosecution as a former president. Now, on behalf of Trump's argument, let's say, let's stipulate this. There are some constitutions in other countries which make former presidents immune from criminal prosecution for things like coups and insurrections. One of them, for a while anyway, was Chile, which said that Pinochet could not be prosecuted, and this was part of an arrangement they made with the new constitution. He would have immunity from criminal prosecution, very explicitly set forth in that constitution. There's a couple other examples. There's nothing like that in the U.S. Constitution, and of course, as we'll come to see, it cuts against everything we believe about our Constitution and its entire constitutional design. So, and in fact, that common sense intuition was articulated by the Republican judge in the D.C. Circuit, Judge Henderson, who said that it would be a striking paradox if the one person in the country charged with taking care that the laws be faithfully executed could defy and violate the laws and then be exempt for his violation of federal criminal laws in the process. All right, so how do we go about looking at this claim? Well, Trump says, first of all, he's so immune from prosecution, it's not even up to the courts to determine whether he's immune from prosecution or not. That, of course, is ridiculous under Marbury versus Madison, the famous Supreme Court decision rendered by Chief Justice John Marshall, proclaiming the doctrine of judicial review, that the Supreme Court has the right, the power, and the duty to declare what the law is. It's emphatically the province and duty of the court to say what the law is and to sort out, precisely these kinds of conflicts. We've got Supreme Court decisions that stand for the proposition, in fact, that the Supreme Court can review presidential actions for their constitutionality. And here's a great one everybody can remember. It's called the steel seizure case. In this case, President Truman faced a series of strikes around the country and was nervous, along with Congress, that the shutdown of the steel industry would interfere with necessary production of weaponry during the Korean War. And Congress attempted to give President Truman the power to intervene to reopen the steel plants by seizing the steel plants, taking government possession of them, and then commanding production of steel. That failed in Congress. Congress rejected that effort. But then the president, Truman, just went ahead and did that anyway. And he said, we're going to take possession of the steel plants in order to keep the war effort going, and I'm going to invoke my war powers, my powers as commander-in-chief during a time of actual conflict in order to do this. And the Supreme Court said, well, wait a second here. The President of the United States has the job of enforcing the laws. And Justice Jackson set it out nicely in his concurring opinion, where he said, think of it kind of like a stoplight. Either you've got a green light where the Constitution specifically gives the president the power to do something, like to appoint the officers in the cabinet subject to the advice and consent of the Senate, or to name ambassadors subject to advice and consent. Those are clear delegations to the president to be able to do something. There you got a green light. And nobody can say, oh, no, the president, you nominated the wrong person. That's not the best qualified person. That is totally within presidential power to decide that, okay? A red light would be something where a power is vested by the Constitution in another branch of the government. Take, for example, the power to declare war. That power is given to Congress. But let's say the president says, this is such an important matter, such an important foreign policy conflict, I'm going to take away from Congress the power to declare war, and I am going to declare war right now for the country. That's a red light. That would clearly be unconstitutional, and under Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court would have the power to revoke that. But then there's the yellow light situation, and this is where a particular power is not specifically enumerated either under Article 2 for the executive branch or under Article 1 for the legislative branch, and Congress has not said anything about it. It's neither delegated that power explicitly to the president, nor has it attempted to delegate that power to the president, but been thwarted in the effort to do so. And there's a yellow light situation, and that's where the court says it's very fact-based, intensive analysis. But the court said in the steel seizure case, this is an easy one, because there's nothing in the power of commander-in-chief that explicitly sets forth the power to seize steel mills or seize any instrument of the economy or commerce to keep things going. And Congress might have been able to delegate this to the president, to give him this power, but it did not do so. There was a bill put in to try to say the president has the power over steel mills and can open them up, but it chose not to do that. That becomes a red light. At that point, he essentially has been specifically foreclosed to undertake that action. All right, all of which is to say, the D.C. Circuit Court was very clear that this matter is indeed going to be up to the judiciary to decide. And in the course of finding that, the court cited this significant passage that has been absorbed into the bloodstream of America over the decades. It comes from a Supreme Court decision called U.S. versus Lee, in which the court wrote, "No man in this country is so high that he is above the law. No officer of the law may set that law at defiance with impunity. All the officers of the government, from the highest to the lowest, are creatures of the law and are bound to obey it. It is the only supreme power in our system of government, and every man who by accepting office participates in its functions is only the more strongly bound to submit to that supremacy and to observe the limitations which it imposes upon the exercise of the authority which it gives." In other words, in this passage, which has been recycled over the centuries, the Supreme Court is saying, not only is it wrong that you as president somehow are not bound by the law, if anything, you are more bound by the law than everybody else. I like to say that those of us who aspire and attain to public office are nothing but the servants of the people, and the moment that we think we're somehow above the people and acting as kings and queens and lords and czars and emperors, that is the moment certainly to evict and eject and reject and impeach and convict and get rid of that person. And the Constitution gives us a lot of mechanisms to do so. All right, so now we're looking at the question. We know that the court is in the right place to be checking this out. Now we get into the heart of Donald Trump's claim, where he says, all right, you can hear my case, you're going to look at it, but I am categorically immune from any criminal prosecution. Why? And here's the argument. If you go to Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7, okay? And bear with me, because it is an extremely tortured, pinched, and really comical reading of this judgment of impeachment clause. But what it says is this: judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless, key word here, shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law. Now, if you read that whole thing in context and give it a common sense read, it is certain to lead you to the conclusion that any president or former president can be subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment. Now, if the president is also impeached first and removed from office by the Senate, and if the Senate decides to disqualify that person from holding an office again, still that convicted president can nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment and trial and judgment and punishment. And you could add in parentheses, because this is what the Constitution is really saying, just like all the other presidents, even though they haven't been impeached or convicted, but if they committed a crime, they can. But now, Trump's lawyers, somewhat cleverly, I must concede, flip the entire thing upside down. And what they read it to mean is that only presidents who have been impeached and convicted can be subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment. Now look at that for a second. They read it to say that basically, the only thing that can happen to you if you're impeached and convicted is removal from office and disqualification. But you also could be subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment, but no other president could. Well, that's of course not what it says. It violates any common sense grammatical construction of the terms of it, and it is completely at odds with all other kinds of text within the Constitution, the structure of the Constitution, and the history of it. So let's start with this. It has always been assumed in our history that a former president could be criminally prosecuted for offenses undertaken in office that come to light later. Take the case of Richard Nixon, who we'll never know because he was pardoned, but who at least allegedly ordered a number of criminal acts, including the break-in at the Watergate, other kinds of criminal espionage, the taking of bribes, hush money, all kinds of stuff. And